Injuries are an unfortunate reality in pro football, and fantasy managers face numerous decisions about their injured players every season. But are there patterns to these injuries, to the recovery times, and the impacts on performance once injured players return to action? Well, my Football Guys colleague and injury expert Adam Hutchison is joining me today to talk about what the data has to say about it. And it's quite a bit of data. More than 2,000 injuries he's tracked over the past 9 years. Knowing what Adam's data says can help dynasty managers make better decisions when it comes to handling their injured players. And that's next on Dynasty Compass. Welcome to Dynasty Compass. I am your host, Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B from Footballguys. Very thrilled today to be joined by my friend and Footballguys colleague, Adam Hutchison, our injury expert and an all-around football expert and good guy. Adam, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you, man?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's good. We got to catch up in Vegas a couple of years, so it was nice to meet in person, and we've had some good back and forth, and I'm glad we're able to hop on the turn on the cameras, pull out the mics, and do the podcast thing.
Yeah, it's good to be able to share your knowledge with the world, which of course you do on Footballguys anyway. But I've been a big fan of yours for some time and following you and making sure that I pay attention to what you have to say about injuries. Because that has made me a better dynasty manager. So hopefully we will be doing that for the folks watching on YouTube or listening on their favorite podcast platform today. How did you become the injury guy at Footballguys? I mean, what led you to this point in life where you do injury reporting on fantasy football?
Yeah, I've talked about this before. I wish, I had some big, inspiring, insightful story. Like most people, I like to play fantasy football. I really got involved in fantasy football Twitter probably right before COVID, like 2018 through 2019, when some of the discourse on Twitter around fantasy football was a little bit healthier than it is today. But was able to kind of parlay some of those conversations and some things I was seeing on Twitter into potential writing opportunities and then other content opportunities. And then with Footballguys, got a little lucky. I know we're both from the same companies who can talk about. I feel fortunate to be able to work for Footballguys. I enjoy every single little day that I'm with the company. I think Joe does a great job of setting things up. He's very mindful and purposeful about the people that he brings on and the positions that he puts people in. So I feel lucky and fortunate that I just kind of networked and met the right people along the way, that when a job opening opened for some injury content over at Footballguys, was able to, get an interview, and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, I'm too very, very proud and thrilled and humbled and honored to be part of the Footballguys family. I can't really think of a different group of people I'd ever want to be doing anything with, let alone fantasy football. But you actually get to bring your professional work experience to bear in your fantasy analysts. Folks may know that I'm a crisis management consultant, so that doesn't really come into play as much. But I believe you're a physical therapist in real life, right?
Yes, sir.
And
yep.
How does that sort of real world foundation shape the way that you approach your fantasy football work?
Yeah, I think it's just given me kind of an objective lens to look at some of these things. I've been guilty of it, and I think anyone that kind of works in the medical field and produces some type of fantasy football content on the injury side, we tend to get into the weeds a little bit too much and get a little bit nerdy about it sometimes. So I've been doing this for a while, where through self-reflection and feedback, I've hopefully kind of fine-tuned that process, and I try to improve on it every year. But it's just given me a foundation to talk about some of these things, and then kind of an objective lens to build some thoughts and some hypothesis and some analysis off of that as well.
Yeah, well, you rest assured that the injury guys are not the only ones who get nerdy about fantasy football. So you're in the weeds. So you're good there. You're in really, really, really good company. But talking about just gathering information and building this over time, you've actually built a rather impressive database of over 2,000 injuries going back to 2017. And while I find it kind of disturbing that there are 2,000 injuries over 9 years that you could put into this database, it shows you what a violent game this is. But what got you started on that, and what makes you decide this one is in and that one is not?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say it's disturbing that I was able to accumulate 2,000 injuries. I mean, that tells you what I'm doing with my free time. I think I'm lucky to fortunately be married, because I'm definitely a big nerd, sifting through and gathering some of those injuries. Really, it just comes down to like fantasy relevant players. Like, could we expand it more? And I get questions sometimes about like defensive players or offensive linemen, and I try to give some analysis on that, but I really have just narrowed it into quarterback, wide receiver, running back, and tight end. Those are the main players that we think of for fantasy football. And then just trying to, again, gather some objective data to give us an idea of expected recovery timelines. What does fantasy production look like when a player comes back versus pre-injury levels? Are there lingering effects of those injuries? Last year, I added some supplements I'm going to continue to build on this year, just looking at like wide receiver, does target share change? For running back, does snap share change? So just trying to build in some of those things. Again, it's not going to tell us, hey, when Amon-Ra St. Brown gets hurt, this is exactly what's going to happen, but it gives us at least a foundation and an idea of a range of outcomes given a certain injury.
Mm-hmm. That makes that 2,000 even more remarkable, that we're only talking about 4 positions, and there are thousands of other injuries that you have not put into the database because they are not the positions that we typically deal with in fantasy football. So that just gives a sense of just how, I mean, all of us as fantasy managers know how prevalent injuries are because we have to manage around that every year. But it just sort of sobering that kind of level of damage happens to people on a weekly basis in this game that we all love. But talking about, the lingering effects and whatnot, you've developed from this a kind of an analytical way of looking at what a recovery is and how likely someone's going to be able to get back to performance level we're expecting and how quickly. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works and what that measure tells you about a player, and then how you're able to use that in your analysis?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this idea kind of really stemmed off of like the injury prone discussion, which, again, not to go all the way back talking about Twitter, but like if anyone that's played fantasy football a lot or consumes fantasy football content, they probably have stumbled at some point across the kind of whole injury prone narrative. So I really just wanted to kind of assign a number to these players and just say, hey, for this player, for player A versus player B, if they both have hamstring injuries, does player A, historically get better quicker than player B? And then what does that score look like? So I've developed this thing called recovery score. It's basically similar to what you would do for like expected fantasy points for a player at a specific play, just breaking it down to specific injuries. So, if a wide receiver is expected to miss a certain amount of games for a hamstring strain, are there players that underscore that? Are there players that maybe take longer time? But I mean, just to give you an example, like if we look at the wide receiver position, like of the players that qualified. So, again, doing this recovery score, to filter out, some of the randomness, I've only included players that have had 3 or more injuries and then looking at their recovery timeline. So of all those players, Amon-Ra St. Brown ranked in the 99th percentile among wide receivers. He historically is somebody that really undercuts typical time missed and has really played through some difficult injuries in the early part of his career. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. He had like a pretty nasty core injury that typically is very limiting for wide receivers, and he was able to really undercut that recovery timeline. Obviously, last year might affect this, but coming into the 2025 season, Tyreek Hill is actually somebody that also ranked in the 90th percentile, dealt with a multitude of injuries, but was actually pretty good at recovering, coming back. Chris Olave was rated pretty low just because of the concussions. The recurrent concussions really affected his score because as he got more and more, they were resulting in they were kind of compounding the time missed. Cooper Kupp is somebody that also kind of ranked in the bottom. I think he ranked in the bottom 25th percentile amongst wide receivers. Some ones that, again, we would kind of think of, Christian McCaffrey, James Conner, those guys typically graded out poor with recovery scores. They typically miss more time than expected. It's an early part of his career. Bucky Irving, pretty durable for running backs, ranking in the top half. Josh Jacobs, maybe not the most explosive fantasy player at this point, but in terms of injuries has done really well coming back. And then looking at tight ends, again, 2025 data might affect this. George Kittle was like pretty phenomenal. He ranked in the 90th percentile amongst tight ends. Obviously, the Achilles injury is kind of unfortunate. Isaiah Likely, pretty durable. And then for, people would expect this, Dalton Kincaid ranking in the bottom 20% amongst tight ends, somebody that's, struggled with injury.
Yeah, someone who has lots of shares of Kincaid, I'm well aware of that fact.
I'm right with you.
About him. So a few moments ago, you mentioned with a bit of a sneer in your face for those not watching on YouTube, the idea of injury prone in that narrative. And in my mind, I'm thinking about guys like Jonathan Brooks and Ricky Pearsall and Marshawn Lloyd and even fairly or mostly unfairly Jordan Tyson from the class that's coming in now. Do past injuries, is there any truth to the injury prone narrative? Do past injuries really do predict future ones? Is it an earned label or is it really not that simple?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discourse and a lot of research in this. Yes, a history of injuries is the best predictor for future injuries, but it's not a perfect science, especially in football. It's a physical game, and there is a randomness component to it. Honestly, that discussion is like really what really drove me to develop this recovery score, just to get, again, some type of objective data that says, hey, if we take the feelings out of it, if we remove the emotions for it, just objectively talking, like, is this player injury prone or not injury prone? That's really what started the recovery score aspect of it. Anytime somebody asks me this question, I tell them they're going to hate the answer because I kind of sit on the fence. I see both aspects of it. I think there are players that probably have different tissue quality, different toughness that factors into time missed versus time not missed. Am I going to overreact to some of those things? No. But I think it is something that could be involved. So is it a lie? Is it not a lie? Yes and no. It's both. But it's not just like, if they're injury prone, they're always going to get injured. And honestly, we've seen some recent examples of that with like Christian McCaffrey. Like Christian McCaffrey is labeled as injury prone. And then, especially after what happened in the 2024 season and then in 2025, like, I don't know where he finished, but it was definitely a top RB, if not the RB1.
Yeah, McCaffrey, one of those guys that he either is that, top 3, top 5 kind of player, or he doesn't play at all. It seems like there isn't much middle ground with him because of the way that he plays and just also the way that he attacks his own health and his own recovery.
And and not to make this about Christian McCaffrey, but obviously this is somebody that I've studied a lot because he typically is a high fantasy football pick. So like we talked about that recovery score timeline. He's somebody that typically does miss more time than expected. But I think he is somebody that holds himself out until he's ready, because when we look at like fantasy production post-injury, where we would see typical declines for things like high ankle sprains, hamstring injuries, he always outperforms the average. So I always tell people, if Christian McCaffrey is active on Sunday, you're getting a healthy Christian McCaffrey. Like, he is going to give you Christian McCaffrey type outputs. But if he's not 100%, I think he's somebody that tends to pull himself and hold himself out, which can be good and bad for fantasy. Obviously, it kind of hamstrings your team, but you know that he's not going to be somebody that's going to go out there in a decoy role and lay a goose egg for you.
Yeah, that actually kind of reminded me on being at 100% before you put yourself out there. Are there any teams that kind of have that same sort of mentality that their players may sit longer, but when they come back, they're closer to full strength? Or do you think it's really more of the players that are driving that?
Not so much in that regard. There's some things that I've looked at in terms of like practice reports, teams using like the questionable tag versus doubtful, some teams being a little bit more kind of liberal with that questionable tag versus some other teams when they label a player as questionable, they're more than likely often out.
Baltimore, because it was Lamar Jackson last year was the big question mark, right? With Baltimore saying that he had practiced and was questionable, and then actually he really didn't practice and he really wasn't questionable.
Yeah, and there have been, for some reason, I feel like the Patriots, and some of that data might be dating back to the Bill Belichick. Yeah. Where he was really not super truthful with some of those practice reports. I think that heavily influenced some of the data as well. But there are definitely teams that definitely fudge that a little bit. And there are some teams that kind of stay true to the course, where if they list a player as questionable, like it can be a true 50-50 percent chance that they play.
There is a Discord out there called Coach Speak Index, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's one that I enjoy looking at as well. That that analyst over there, and his name slips my brain, but I'll put it in the show notes when I look it up here after we're done recording. But he kind of has I don't want to call it a truth meter, but essentially he says this coach has a 75% rate of being accurate when he says so-and-so is going to be out a number of weeks or talking about a particular injury. So I think there's definitely noticeable patterns of at least what the coaches say. Now, not necessarily what they're reporting on official sheets, Belichick and Harbaugh notwithstanding. But it does strike me at least that I feel better about an injury situation when some coaches say it, and I'm less likely to believe it when others. And that's been my natural suspiciousness, I guess, or maybe I've just been burned enough over the years that I learned to trust some and not others.
Yeah, no, I think I should probably gear this a little bit more towards coach speak, because I do think coaches play into it, but I was able to pull up those numbers. So at least, again, this is kind of a wide range because it's dating back to 2017. But when we look at the top 4 teams, when a player's now, again, too, I've only looked at fantasy relevant players, so there's some other things that could skew this. But looking at some of the top teams in terms of percent chance to play when listed as questionable on the final injury report, players most likely to play on the Chargers, Giants, Chicago, and Tampa Bay rank in the top half. Bottom half has actually been Philadelphia, has been the worst, Houston, Buffalo, New Orleans, and Atlanta. Baltimore, I know maybe it'll be interesting to add the 2025 data in there. Baltimore's kind of middle of the pack. They hover around that 67% in terms of percent chance to play when listed questionable on the injury report.
Yeah, I mean, because you've looked at the numbers. Some of us, you say it's an emotional game at times in fantasy football. I think just enough of us were counting on Lamar Jackson to play that weekend, and when he was not, after we were kind of assured he was okay to do so, I think that sticks out more than any actual pattern of what Harbaugh and Baltimore have done as an organization. What he did when he was there. So I may be slinging mud at him unnecessarily, but that just was such a a PTSD inducing kind of situation. I thought I'd ask you about it. How much, we talk in other narratives about age cliffs and where production starts to decline. Do you see anything like that in injury rate and recovery? Is there a meaningful threshold where a player's age starts to make recovery more difficult?
I think injury factors into it, certainly. Like somebody like Nick Chubb comes to mind where, back half of his career, some of those injuries start to snowball a little bit. And that really drives down the production. But I certainly do believe that like age factors into it. It's probably different for different players, obviously. I forget who has really talked about this a lot on Twitter, so I do apologize. But like, those elite producers, those guys that are in the 99th percentile, tend to outperform those age apex curves a lot more, just because obviously they're elite, but then, teams are going to be more willing to invest in them continually because they trust that player. A good example of that is like Derrick Henry. I think for not only the running back position, but just what Derrick Henry does as a running back. He's not somebody that is a big pass catcher or somebody that is really avoiding contact. Like he's definitely, running between the tackles and grinding. He's somebody that's outperformed those age curves. But I think for just the general population, the general census in the NFL, like I do think that factors into it.
One of the other popular narratives, Adam, is the whole sort of ACL reconstruction, that there's a year of struggling afterward. I think we could probably throw the Achilles tendons into this too, since they've been a little more prevalent in the last few years. Does your data actually show that there is this 1 year struggle? Is the conventional wisdom right here, or are we kind of relying on the old days when knee surgery meant you were out for a year?
Yeah, no, I think in terms of recovery timelines has gotten better in terms of some of the research. We still, even with some of the recent examples with ACLs specifically, I don't have a lot of hard concrete data on Achilles injuries, but my guess would be similar pattern. That first year, efficiency numbers, specifically looking at running backs, yards per game, attempts per game, going into their receiving work, target share, yards per route run, all of that sees a pretty significant decline in year one after an ACL. That's why, obviously pass catching running backs are more valuable, but I've said that those running backs coming off of ACL tears, I think they do better if they have some type of receiving work to help buoy a little bit of the rushing production decline that we're likely going to see for them. And then for, wide receivers, it's kind of the same thing in terms of yards per route run, target share, yards per reception. There is some, at least at the data I've looked at, decline in those metrics.
One of the other sort of narratives that's out there, and it's really surprising because you by the way, for those who do not know, Adam puts out this terrific series of articles before a season that sort of breaks down this research that he's done and really sort of sets the table for the injuries that are coming in the season. But one of the things you've talked about is the sort of the young athlete and the athleticism narrative. That he's young, he's a freak athlete, he'll bounce right back. That doesn't really seem to necessarily be the case, particularly with the knee injuries. We've talked about older players being a bit of an issue in terms of recovery, but the younger players aren't just given a pass either. So what's the truth here? This is in this narrative that the freak athlete still has basically the same recovery arc as the not freak athlete.
So, just looking at from a correlation perspective, and again, some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff, specifically for ACLs, is a small sample because we got to have a wide receiver that's fantasy relevant. We got to have some idea of their pre-injury fantasy football production, and then get some post fantasy football production. So for the wide receivers right now, not including anything that's happened in 2025. Again, I'm updating that stuff this offseason. I've got 30 wide receivers, and just purely looking at like correlation in terms of pre-production to post fantasy football points per game following an ACL. It's the stuff that we would typically use for like charting fantasy football success. So pre-ACL total receptions, pre-ACL targets per game, pre-ACL fantasy points per game, pre-ACL yards per game, career best yards per route run. All of that stuff was heavily favorably correlates to post-production and fantasy football points. Stuff like age did not correlate very well. RAS score for people that follow MathBomb on Twitter, relative athletic score did not grade very well for wide receivers. For running backs, it's a little different. RAS score is not terrible, not poorly correlated, but it looks like there is at least a marginal relationship correlation. But some of the best metrics were career best target share, career best attempts per game, number of days from when they had surgery. So running backs that get a little extra time, depending on where their injury is. So from when they have surgery to when they come back game one, the number of days in between there, a longer number of days has a more positive relationship on post fantasy football points per game versus a shorter timeline. Things that didn't really grade well for running back. Again, age was kind of rated toward the bottom. I don't think I talked about for the running backs that I've included. I think it's a similar sample size though, to wide receivers. I still have not added Zach Charbonnet, but minus him, I've got 28 running backs for that sample. So again, small sample, but we're just trying to again find some connection, some correlation points to give us an idea of, hey, if this running back has an ACL tear, and I can put in these metrics. I don't even know if you can really call it modeling, but I can get an idea of what post fantasy football production will look like using some of those positive correlation values.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think we as fantasy analysts, no matter what our bent is, have to get comfortable with is small sample sizes, because there's only a 17-game season and there's not a whole lot to work with data-wise in terms of volume. So you have to be able to make some decisions and draw some conclusions on some numbers that would probably make a clinical trial for a drug manufacturer cringe. But that's where we that's where we are as fantasy. Fortunately, the word fantasy is in there, so we're good. Any other things? Any other conventional wisdom around injuries out there that's just either flat wrong or is at least not really backed up by the data that you've amassed in the last 9 years?
Yeah. I mean, a couple things like, just penciling in like a 9-month recovery timeline for an ACL. I think it, and the other thing that people do is they look at when the injury happened to when, the next season starts. Mm-hmm. And that's where I've gone back and looked at specifically surgery to play timelines, because that's really when the rehab starts. Like you can do some prehab before you have it, but finding out those surgery dates. Zach Charbonnet is kind of one of those players where, could Charbonnet play in 2026? I think it's possible, but I'm really skeptical about what his 2026 fantasy production is going to look like. And even if he plays at all this season, just based on how late his injury was. And unfortunately, like I could see him missing most, if not all of the 2026 season. I don't know how off topic we want to get here, but obviously it's a hot button topic on Twitter right now, dealing with like the whole like knee valgus things. I mean, for the people watching, like that kind of is something that has bothered me for a while. That's why I got the hashtag valgus behind me. It's just kind of a running joke with some people that I talk with, just about like, it started with Jerry Jeudy, but like some of the mechanics for some of these athletes, if they're doing this with their knees or if they're flat footed, they're going to be at a higher injury risk. I think it's really, really hard to look at somebody's still frame photo or even a 5-second clip slowed down and say that player's mechanics are bad versus somebody else, and then using that to predict injury. People were pretty skeptical. This is dating back probably like, I don't even know when Judy came out, 2019, 2020, but like, knock on wood, the guy has not torn his ACL. His knee valgus is obviously so contagious that it resulted in Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Albert Obukiwunum, and Javonte Williams all tearing their ACL, but somehow Jerry Jeudy avoided it despite his knee valgus. Those are some things that I kind of steer away from. I look at a lot of things not as black and white. Like there's probably a little bit of gray, player specific, fantasy output. This gets into a little bit of game theory, but I mean it's all risk versus reward. Like I was somebody that was willing to bet on Christian McCaffrey, and it's burned me sometimes, but it's also helped me a lot because he's won me some fantasy football championships when he's been able to stay healthy.
I'm with you. I think a lot of folks are there. With some years he has driven me straight into the lottery for the first draft pick, and other years he's won championships, and that's just sort of the risk reward with somebody. I mean, when he is on, he is really, really on, and I think that's worth that effort. But that re-injury risk is always sort of there. It's sort of funny that we don't think necessarily about the injury risk before they get hurt the first time, but then afterward, this risk keeps coming up, and that's something I think you've looked at a lot. I mean, there are particular injury types or that have particularly high re-injury rates that dynasty managers really need to be paying attention to. Perhaps maybe even underestimate this likelihood, and maybe don't appreciate the risk of the player that they may have as a result.
Yeah, and I break this down by position, but just looking at tight end again, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, running back, some injuries that have a higher re-injury rate compared to other injuries. Hamstrings tend to be ones that really linger for all skill position players, specifically tight ends and wide receivers have a higher re-injury rate for whatever reason when they suffer those. Oddly enough, high ankle sprains in quarterbacks. My guess on that is that if a quarterback has a high ankle sprain, they're typically the mobile type quarterback that's probably going to be testing the limits of that a little bit. I haven't really dug into that too much, but those are just some of the raw numbers that I've gotten when looking at re-injury rate by position. AC joint sprains for wide receivers, which makes sense. Those guys that are going up for the 50-50 balls and kind of laying out, if they sustain that injury, it's probably somebody that does a lot. Kind of Mike Williams is somebody that I think of with that example, that I think maybe suffered with that a couple of years ago. And then for running backs, just non-specific hip injuries, rib injuries or rib fractures, which would make sense given their position, and MCL sprains had the highest re-injury risk among running backs.
MCL sprains. That's interesting.
MCL. Yeah. So an MCL sprain is tough because if it's not a full tear that doesn't need surgery, it's a ligament that's probably been stretched and is going to be a little bit more lax, at least for a short period of time in season. So a lot of those times, those guys are going to wear some type of external bracing to help with it. But MCL sprains, specifically with cutting and moving laterally, it's going to test that ligament. So a running back specifically has an MCL sprain, misses 3 weeks and comes back. I think they're just going to be at a higher injury risk than, a different type of injury. At least that's what the data points to.
Is there a meaningful difference between the first time a player injures something and then the second time, either the same site or an adjacent structure in the body? And if that's the case, should that change the calculus that dynasty managers have when one of their players or a player they're interested in has gotten hurt for a second time in a particular part of the body?
I mean, I think it's a good question. I don't have anything specifically that looks at that. I would say inherently yes, just in terms of my background in dealing with some sports medicine as a physical therapist, and then Just kind of like what we were talking about a little bit earlier in the show where, previous injury is back predictor for a future injury. The second part of that question, I think, is the interesting part because, again, I think that gets into a little bit of game theory and dealing with fantasy football and dealing with your league mates. Whether it's true or not might not really even matter because in your league mate's mind, if you're trying to move that player, they're going to look at it as damaged goods. So he's going to lose value in your fantasy football league. Whether it's true or not, there's just going to be players that your league mates are going to shy away from. Again, we're using him as an example. We could probably think of somebody else, but Christian McCaffrey, if you look at keep trade cut, they sometimes have those curves that show where a player's value is from one year to another, and his goes up and down based on what type of season he just finished having. There's going to be people that are going to try buy low, and there's going to be people that are going to shy away from him just because they think he might be injury prone. So it's an interesting question. I mean, not to get too off topic, but for some injuries, and even for some player situations, it's just something where maybe I think they can do well, but I'll stay away from them just because I don't want to have them on my team. Yeah. An example of that is like thinking about Jameson Williams when he came out his rookie season coming off an ACL tear. Like I just thought that was going to be a hard injury for a rookie wide receiver to bust in year one. Going into rookie drafts, he was probably a middle first round pick, somewhere between the 106 to kind of 109 region. And he was just somebody coming into the season. His rookie year, I did not draft a lot of. I've acquired a couple of Jameson Williams shares throughout the years. Now that he's a couple of years removed from that specific injury, but I just thought that was somebody that was not going to retain value. You were better off pivoting to a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave, who I felt more confident that was going to. I felt like they were going to be. I was more confident that they were going to be healthy year one, and that was going to help improve their value. Whether they stood on my team and gave me more fantasy football points, or somebody that I could move for a different asset.
Yeah, I like to think of the injured players kind of as this concept of broken toys. That these are players that would normally be in a lineup but can't be because they're hurt. And I find that they can actually be really good value buys, particularly for teams that aren't contending. If they're not trying to make the playoffs, they have the ability, as you say, if a manager who has, Malik Neighbors may not be the best example because he's still fairly young and will likely still be a superstar. But if you're a contending team and you've got Malik Neighbors sitting on your bench and someone offers you a starting caliber wide receiver for him, that becomes an interesting question for you as a manager. So I do find that, acquiring damaged goods, these broken toys, can actually be a really good strategy. Are there certain, not necessarily players, but are there certain types of injuries that you would say, no, I really don't think I want to acquire this particular situation, even at a pretty significant discount?
Yeah. The season-ending ones, the season-ending injuries are, I think, the trickiest. ACL tears, I'm depending on the player age and position and where they're at in their career arc, I'm not so worried about. Achilles would be tough. The injury kind of Tank Dell had 2 years ago with it's a complete knee dislocation. Yes. Those are really tough. Patellar tendon ruptures, so that's a knee injury. Again, those are really tough. Liz Frank, there's some conflicting data. I think it would depend on player age. Julio Jones is somebody that I think of with that. He's having some chronic foot issues, but it was in the earlier part of his career. And he was able to break through a little bit. So it's a little bit of a nuanced concept, but I don't think there is any injury that I'd be avoiding completely. I think there's always a right price and a buy window, specifically if we're looking at Dynasty. But if you had me rank like three, like Achilles, knee dislocation, patellar tendon rupture, those would be things that I'd be really scared about buying a player at whatever that price would be.
Yeah. And of course, we have a potentially aging but superstar tight end in George Kittle, who's in that first bucket that you've got there with the ACL tear. And
Achilles.
if I'm not mistaken, Cam Scadaboo's in the second one, right? With the knee dislocation. Is that what happened to him, or I got him confused with somebody else?
Yeah. So George Kittle ruptured his Achilles. I think Cam Scadaboo, and this is always a bad look when the injury guy. I'm telling you guys, when I have just started my process. Like, I try to gather this stuff in season, but within season, like, I'm podcasting and then I'm writing injury articles. When the season's over, I turn my brain off for a little bit. So I'm literally in data collection mode between March, April, May, and June. I'm just collecting all the previous injuries and factoring into some of the stuff. Cam Scadaboo had an ankle dislocation.
Ankle dislocation. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Ankle dislocation, which is a big issue. Chris Godwin had a similar injury, but I feel a little bit more confident about Cam Scadaboo's 2026 outlook and his long-term dynasty outlook versus a knee dislocation, just the complications that come with that.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I was very confident in that question when I started. Like, wait a minute, I don't think that's actually right. So turns out I wasn't right.
Good, man.
This is why we ask these kinds of questions.
I didn't know. I had to look it up too.
Well, yeah, at least for you, I mean, you have said several times you're still inputting the data from last season, so it's a little unfair to ask about something that happened only a few months ago when you are still adding to that database. But that data also tracks lingering effects. Like, this is when a player comes back, but their production is still suppressed. And so, we often cheer. I know I personally try not to put a player back into a lineup the week that they've come back from an injury for that very reason. But I do that sort of with a howitzer approach. I do that with everybody. Are there injury types where we really should be maybe holding them out of our lineups for a couple of weeks till we see how they're performing, or should we just go ahead and put them in or keep them out as I've been doing? Is there any kind of pattern to that dynasty managers should be looking at in terms of making that decision? Okay, so-and-so is coming back from this injury. He's been out 4 weeks. Do I start him this week or do I hold him out?
Yeah, and just to give some people like a little bit of a peek behind the curtains. So what I've done for these specific injuries is I've said, okay, all the NFL wide receivers that have had hamstring injuries, what's their pre-fantasy football production versus post-fantasy football production, their first game back, and then over a 3-game sample size to measure lingering effects. I've taken the averages in terms of percent decline, and then based on those percent declines, I put them in specific tiers, with 1 being minimal change. They usually, on average, kind of bounce right back, and 5 being, hey, across the board, on average, these players really see significant declines that linger. High ankle sprains and calf strains among NFL running backs typically have the most lingering effects in terms of fantasy football decline. For wide receivers, any type of core, abdominal injury or a hip injury. And then it wasn't as significant as like calf strains or high ankle sprains, but core injuries as well can be difficult for NFL running backs. And that kind of talks about, again, going to the earlier part of the show where it wasn't the only thing that factored into it, but I was impressed with, and Amon-Ra St. Brown has scored well because he had a core injury and was really able to undershoot that recovery timeline. But then in terms of fantasy football production, I mean, really saw kind of a minimal decline and was able to bounce back rather quickly.
We've talked a little bit about practice reports and the signals that you get from that. And you've done a lot of research into that. What is the most useful thing that dynasty managers should be paying, or fantasy football managers generally should be paying attention to in terms of practice reports? Is it what's actually said? Is it what's happening on the field? Is it something else? I mean, where's the truth in where's the usable information in practice reports?
Honestly, I've been adding to this more and more, but what I have found is the final day in a practice, whether that be the Friday or the Saturday, what type of participation that player had, whether it be limited, full, or not practicing at all, is typically the most predictive of whether or not that player is going to play. It factors in a little bit when we were talking about with those specific teams too, of, listing a player as questionable on the final injury report. And then obviously a little bit of the player's history will factor into that. But what I would say is it's usually that final practice report. So when a player starts off the week limited or not practicing, I'm not typically the guy on Twitter like swinging the red flag and freaking out, especially if it's a veteran player. We were seeing a lot more of that load management and veteran rest days. Given the injury, I probably wouldn't panic that much. It's usually that final practice report that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and certainly we don't want to see the participation go down as the week goes across. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I was paying more attention to it this year, or maybe more of my players were caught in this bucket. But it seemed like we had a significant number of Saturday injuries turn up than we've had in past years. And I was wondering if there was any truth to that, or are we seeing actual injury impacts, or are we seeing gamesmanship by coaches, or what are we making out of a trend of these last day injuries that seem to kind of pop up?
Yeah. It's never good when that happens. I mean, if that typically happens, that not always, but often points to a new injury, a late week injury. I don't remember a whole lot this season. But I do an article that comes out every Saturday for Footballguys subscribers. And if I did pick up on a late injury, I'm sure I wrote about how if somebody popped up on the injury report on Thursday or Friday after not coming in the week limited at all, that was a little bit concerning for me that they were going to play that following Sunday.
Well, of course, during the season, everything is so compressed, and there is a strong desire of players to be playing and a strong need for the teams and their teammates to have them out there. But when we're in, OTAs and we're in training camp during the off season, that, of course, the impetus for that's a lot lower. We don't have to have these guys out on the field. When should dynasty managers be watching for and caring about persistent absences or limited participation in the off-season programs and during training camp? Is there some signal that says this might really be a problem when the regular season comes around in a few weeks or months, depending on where we are in the calendar?
It would have to be a significant extended absence. And what I mean by that is, again, charting injuries, preseason injuries, and then average time missed for those preseason injuries. And it is on average longer than something that we would see in season. In season, I mean, not all, but a lot of these contracts are incentive based. These guys want to play, like
right.
With the rehab and the recovery that's going on in season, it's really about putting a Band-Aid on it and just trying to get to the end of the season. Versus the off season where for the most part, these guys aren't making a lot of their money. The teams will be a little bit more cautious and delicate with some of those injuries. But like looking at Cooper Kupp 2023 had a hamstring injury that started in the preseason. And he actually missed 8 weeks, which was a significant amount of time for a hamstring. Usually we're somewhere between that 3 to 4 week mark, and dating into 2023. So he did miss the first 4 weeks of the season. So that tells you that, that was a kind of a 4-week injury preseason and maybe tweaked it. But again, if a guy's sitting out, obviously the closer that we get to the season, I might get a little bit worried. Using a more recent example, like Darnell Mooney, missed a good chunk, and it was getting closer and closer to the season, and Atlanta was not really telling us what type of shoulder injury that Darnell Mooney had. And I had not seen the injury
Mhm.
I had no inside information, but based on the timeline and kind of extended timeline, I was like, I think Darnell Mooney has an AC joint sprain, and I think that actually did come to fruition. Where I was like, maybe I'm getting a little bit concerned now, because if he's missing this amount of time for an AC joint sprain, it might be one of the more significant AC joint sprains. So circling back to your question, I don't panic too much about it. Because I think teams are going to be a little bit more cautious in the preseason and in the offseason, holding guys out. If it's a new injury that's happening kind of during training camp and we're 2 to 3 weeks out from the season, I might get a little bit worried. And this is more of a redraft mindset, where maybe if that player is in a similar tier, I move him toward the back end of that tier. But it's not somebody like, oh, you got to take Jahmyr Gibbs off your draft board. He's got a hamstring strain to start the season. He's going to be a bust. Like, if he's missing 4 to 5 weeks, honestly, good. Like, he's not getting me any fantasy points in preseason, so sit out, rest up, and let's get ready for the season.
Yeah, and there's also it's difficult to sort of separate out what is an injury-related performance issue and what is you didn't really get to do training camp, and so this offense that just got installed around you haven't really practiced in. And the guy I'm thinking of right now for that is Alec Pierce from Indianapolis, who. The last report that I saw coming out of there, the suggestion was he was going to miss basically the entire offseason training program. And he is now the alpha in that offense. There's new elements to that offense. And so even if he is at full strength in week 1, there's still sort of a performance issue, because is he really ready to play at that point? Even if he's really healthy, has he got the command of the offense that he needs in order to play? And I know there's no way that you could possibly separate that out, but that to me is just something that lingers with me too, that even if they're missing time, they're not scoring points for you because it's the preseason, but that practice time is a bit important, at least maybe for the younger players in particular. And maybe I'm thinking in terms of rookies who may miss chunks of their offseason program, that does seem to have a really dampening effect on their season 1. I think it's something you mentioned a little bit earlier also, and that your numbers bear that out as well. Yeah.
And the Alec Pierce one is a little bit interesting, because this is like new information at this point. This has to be.
I was surprised.
I was surprised by it as well. He's not somebody that, like, I've said before, I'm not taking off my draft board completely, but because I'm a nerd, like, I'm in some startups right now, and when I've gotten to like the Alec Pierce range, I've pivoted off of him just because I think they're similar to what you're talking about. Like, is there going to be a ramp up period where the other thing that factors into it, and again, this has kind of gone off topic with just making it about Alec Pierce, but like, I think Alec Pierce has looked great in spurts. Honestly, the contract that he got from Indianapolis was pretty surprising. Like, I don't know. I hate to say it. He hasn't really done much to like earn the contract that they give him. That was a big leap of faith by Indianapolis, I think, to give him that amount of money, and kind of, like you said, make him the alpha of that offense and let Michael Pittman go. In terms of production, I think it's been definitely flip-flopped. Obviously, age is going to factor into that a little bit, but when you factor that into, like, I haven't really seen it from Alec Pierce. It was going to be kind of a big leap of faith drafting him, and then now we got this new injury. I'm just kind of like, yeah, I could go to somebody else range and feel a little bit more comfortable with that pick.
Yeah, and certainly that's I think a bigger deal for redraft than it is going to be for Dynasty, because in Dynasty we are talking about multiple timelines. So when we're thinking about someone like Alec Pierce, and it's okay that we went off topic there, I'm the one who brought him up in the first place. If we're thinking about him, what would you as a Dynasty manager, I mean, what would be kind of an appropriate injury discount for him? If you were going out to go get him, you're thinking this may not be the year that he's going to deliver, even if we assume he can deliver on what that contract says he's going to deliver on that role he's going to have with Indianapolis, assume he is going to hit that at some point. What's the injury discount for getting him now for you as a Dynasty manager?
Yeah, I mean, I can name some players that kind of went around him or after him, and you tell me if you think this is crazy. Now, again, we're going to talk about this, and there's going to be people who are like, I would I would never do that. That player's so old. I don't want him on my dynasty team. And it depends on how you're constructing your team. If you're really going for it, win now. Like I'd be okay taking DJ Moore over Alec Pierce. At least in this draft, again, this is anecdotal. He went behind Alec Pierce. Like just factoring in the injury and not seeing it, I think I'd rather have DJ Moore. He's kind of in a good spot this year in Buffalo. People are probably going to roll their eyes at this because this guy's definitely not been the epitome of health. But like Christian Watson, I'll be honest with you. Like looking at the wide receiver ACL data, I was very skeptical that Christian Watson was going to really put up any meaningful points in 2025 when he came back from his ACL tear, and he far exceeded my expectations to where like I think I'm back in on Christian Watson. So he's somebody that I'm okay pivoting towards. This guy's a wide receiver too. In his offense, I don't have their ages in front of me, but my guess is they're a similar range. I think I'd rather have Jordan Addison, with the information that we have right now. And then I could be talked into like DK Metcalf versus Alec Pierce. I mean, DK Metcalf had a pretty good 2025 season. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty in what that Pittsburgh offense is going to look like. And DK Metcalf is considerably older than Alec Pierce. But like, I'd be like, if I had Alec Pierce and I was or if I was win now, he's certainly been the sexier name. Like, could I send him to the DK Calf manager and get like a 2027 third as like maybe a throw in, like send Alec Pierce and get DK Metcalf in a third back? Like I'd do that right now. I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, I think to me the only concern is just I don't know who's going to throw the ball at DK Metcalf today, so that might not be a trade I'd make right this moment, but it might be one I might make in a month or even 2 weeks from now when we find out a little bit more about where Pittsburgh is. And incidentally, for folks, this is being recorded a couple of days before the NFL draft, so we may already have this answer by the time that you are watching this, and you may say, yeah, I would make this trade, or no, you guys are nuts, and we'll find out when we get there. But is there a point, man, when you're just like, I'm out, there's no, because of injury situation or pattern of it, you're just like, there's really not really a price point that I would go get this guy?
No, I mean, if someone's giving somebody away, like it all comes down to risk versus reward. Two dynasty assets right now that I don't think you can really, well, one of them, like Jonathan Brooks, I'm kind of out on Jonathan Brooks. I get it. There's, even with Rico Dotto leaving, there's still a lot of running backs left in Carolina that I think he's going to have an uphill battle coming off 2 consecutive ACL tears. He's somebody that, I mean, if you look at Keep Trade Cut, he's been involved in some trades. Like there is some movement on Jonathan Brooks. Like someone wanted to give me even a mid 2026 second, and I can get out on Jonathan Brooks. Like I'd do that in a heartbeat. And I'm willing to eat crow on that, but I'll lose a little bit of the value based on the rookie pick that I used on Jonathan Brooks and get a 2026 second. Everyone hates this 2026 class anyway, so you could probably get that done. We talked about him a little bit, but like Tank Dell, I think is kind of in a tricky spot because I don't think you can get much for Tank Dell. Like I think you just got to kind of recoup the value. I'm certainly not going out and acquiring a lot of Tank Dell because I think people that have him probably have a similar mindset to me of like, this is just damage goods at this point. Like what I'm going to get for him, I might as well just sit and see if there's kind of a miracle. So those are two that are jumping out to me off the top of my head. I don't know if you have any strong thoughts about like Jonathan Brooks. I know, again, he's one of the sexier names of this offseason.
Yeah, I like Brooks better than I would like Dell, in part because I think I still like Brooks coming out of college. Not that I didn't like Tank Dell coming out of college, but I really did like Brooks a lot. Had him ranked fairly highly on my board at that time. But it's the cost of acquisition. It's what would his role be on my team if I got him. If he's my RB2, that's a real problem. But if he's my RB5 and he can come in and if he works out, he can be a starter, or at least a spot starter. That's great. And if not, then I've got a place to park him on my bench until such time as I don't have him anymore. Dell, I think, is a lot trickier just because of the nature of that injury. I mean, we all saw that happen in real time, and never mind the malpractice of the coaching staff of putting him in that situation in the first place. But that just seemed like I don't know what his role is going to be really when he comes back, as the NFL is now evolving into these multi-tight end sets. The sorts of things that Tank Dell used to do may not be what you're asked to do anymore when he comes back around. So I'm with you there. I'm really kind of out on him as well. Well, Adam, we've covered a lot of ground here today. If we could take a step back and just if you had some like a short checklist or some questions that you should be asking before you make a move on an injured player, what should the thought process be for dynasty managers, whether it's Jonathan Brooks or Alec Pierce or George Kittle or someone who isn't even hurt yet, maybe Zach Charbonnet is, what are the questions they should be asking themselves before they make a move on those players?
I think it's nothing's super profound, and it would be really for any question or any decision that you're making for your dynasty team is, first off, like, know your window. Are you win now, or are you probably bottom half of the league, where maybe you're looking to acquire more assets or even get an injury discount. So I think knowing your window is big. In regards to injuries, I think knowing the injury, is it one of those big ones that we were talking about? Is it a patellar dislocation, knee dislocation, Liz Frank injury, Achilles tendon rupture? So know the injury. And then, know the risk also associated with that. A buddy of mine that he actually broke off this year and started his own company on the clock, Scott Belanger, Jax Falcone on Twitter. He always says, like, be ready to be wrong. I think that's a great way to kind of frame the dynasty aspect is, we're all making educated guesses and there's risk associated with it. Just be ready to be wrong. You're probably going to be wrong more often than not. But just knowing that. So I would say my to wrap it up there is know your window, know the injury, know the risk.
Thanks so much for joining me here today and talking about injuries. It's always great hanging with you and chatting with you. Just remind everybody one more time where they can find you.
Absolutely. Again, appreciate you having me. This is fun doing this. So I'm exclusively over at Footballguys. In season, you can find all my injury content. Monday, I do a kind of synopsis of all the injuries that happened the previous Sunday. And then on Saturday, I give projections in terms of likelihood to play for players that are on the injury report coming into that week. And I will more often than not be on Football Guys YouTube channel on Sunday, answering start-sit questions with Jeff Bell and Joey Wright in regards to player injuries. If you want to follow my content kind of on the off season and in season, I'm also occasionally on Twitter. My handle is @therealadam_H. You can ask me questions. If I'm in a good mood, I'll answer them. And then, that's where I'm at.
You only have to answer them on Sunday mornings. You can answer them voluntarily the rest of the time, right?
Sure.
Well, and thank you also, those of you watching on YouTube or listening on Apple or Spotify or your favorite podcast platform. I really do appreciate that. If you're on YouTube, please give us a like or a subscribe, drop in a comment. I respond to all of those, and those will really help the show grow on that platform. Over on Apple, please leave a 5-star rating and a review. That will also help this show grow quite a bit. And so thank you all for that. We are not here if you are not here watching, listening, and learning, hopefully from some experts like Adam here about how to better manage your dynasty teams and go out and win your leagues. We will be back next week with another episode. And so we will see you then on Dynasty Compass.